is the third Calico lecture series of this semester. For those of you who've been here before, you've heard from my colleagues what the Calico lecture series is. But for those of you who are new here and haven't come to this program before, a number of years ago, one of our alums remembered that some of his most formative experiences at Hampshire were the hordes of people that we had invited at a time when we used to get NEA grants and grants from the government. We used to have visiting artist programs here all the time. So he wanted to see that that can happen again since we don't have that kind of support from the government. So his family gave us yearly funds to have this program now for about 8, 9, maybe longer years. So we hope to continue again next semester for a couple of more programs. So stay tuned. If you can do some sleuthing on the Hampshire College website, you have to dig in and you can find the Calico website to see what's happening. I want to thank David for all of his time and energy this morning working with Film 2, the advanced filmmaking class, and he's here this evening to present more of his work to the general community. I've known David for about a decade now, and I've really been impressed with his commitment to making films, and I want to underscore the notion of making films. David has his own unique approach to thinking about the medium as a sculptor would or as a painter would, and he demonstrated some of that process for us this morning, and I think you'll see some of the work again this evening. I've also been impressed by the fact that some very prestigious venues throughout the USA and Europe and other places have recognized David's work. He's been shown at the recent views of the Avant-Garde from the New York Film Festival, the recent Whitney Biennial, and also a recent Guggenheim Fellowship, which will give him time and some resources to continue doing the work, the series, some of which we'll see here tonight. David's work has also been collected by the Whitney, by the Museum School of the Art Institute of Chicago, and by private collectors in the US and Japan and in Europe. David has a graduate degree from the Art Institute of Chicago. He's taught for a number of years at Ithaca College, but now, because of his newfound resources, he's living and working on his own projects in Brooklyn, New York. So please welcome David Gatten.
I'm very happy to be here. I was telling the story earlier of being an undergraduate at the University of North Carolina in Greensboro, and working on a film festival and getting all of these submissions coming in, and this incredibly strange 45-minute film came in, and none of us could understand it, and it drove some people crazy, and I knew that it was fantastic, but I couldn't explain to anyone why, and I fought to get it put in the festival. And I was able to get it in the festival, and then it won one of the big prizes. And I was so excited to be able to call and say, Mr. Rivette, your film has won a prize at our film festival. That is how I met Abraham, just through his film, Everything's for You, which if he hasn't shown that one around here lately, I think you should pester him and make sure that you do see that film. It's very important to me. So this completes a circle, in a way, for me to be able to come here tonight and share work with you. Another wonderful thing about coming to Amherst for me is the fact that I spend a lot of time with poetry, and so to come to Emily Dickinson's home is wonderful. I was taken there last night by poet Peter Gizzi, who lives near here, to her grave, and saw her grave in the moonlight. And it was very, very beautiful, and I love the fact that somebody had left a ballpoint pen on her tombstone. It's very beautiful. When we were talking about her last night, one of the things that Peter Gizzi said about her is that he thought that she was one of the pinnacles, one of the real high points in the use of language in America. And the work that I'm going to share with you tonight is very much about the development of words and ideas in the colonial period in North America. I've been making films for about 10 years, and during that time I've been working on 3 different film series. I'm going to show you 4 films tonight from the series that has consumed the bulk of my creative energy over the last 10 years. I'm in the middle, I'm almost right at the middle of this project where I'm making 9 films. Each of the 9 films takes as point of departure a particular book, a volume from the library of William Byrd of Westover. This is a guy who lived in Virginia in the early 18th century and collected what was the largest personal library in the colonies. Byrd's library is interesting to me for the books that he had and the way he organized those books, which we have a record of. What he put next to what on the bookcase showed a lot about his thinking. But also for the fact that after William Byrd's death, his books were auctioned off. Many of them were bought by Thomas Jefferson. You may know Thomas Jefferson's books are then, he donates those, he gives them to the country, and his books become the beginnings of the Library of Congress, our national library. So there is a way in which William Byrd's library is the site of transfer from Europe for all of religious thinking, philosophy, politics, medicine, law. His library is the site where all of that comes over and begins to get transformed by being a North American. I'm interested in his library because I think it tells us something about the formation of American identity, certainly American intellectual identity, in the first half of the 18th century. I'm interested also in biographical particulars of the Byrd family, things about William Byrd, and especially and increasingly the life of his daughter Evelyn. Each of the films also is an investigation into a different kind of division that I believe existed in North America at the beginning of the 18th century. And so each film explores either the division of landscape, the partitioning of landscape through exploration, the separation of ideas through categorization, the way people are separated across time and space. Later in the series, dealing with things like architecture and division of labor. It's America in the 18th century, division of labor is obviously a big issue. So the films will touch on those things as they move through different shapes and ideas. There's a lot of text in these films, and not all of it you're going to be able to read, and that will be frustrating to you, and that's as it should be. But I hope that it doesn't become oppressively frustrating. So don't feel you're not supposed to be able to read everything. So relax into it. I'm actually very, very interested at the point at which you can no longer read and must process text as image. That's part of what I'm working with. The other thing you should know is these films are all made without a fixed soundtrack, which is, as I like to say, that they are not silent films, because I don't believe that there's any such thing as a silent film. They're quiet films. And so always in a room with people there will be sound. And sometimes I think in the avant-garde tradition, it's been about trying to get to a complete, pure, silent space, and everyone feels like they can't move or cough or breathe. But you can, and that's encouraged. This is the quiet space of the library, not the sacred space of the church where you have to feel that you're being policed. So don't worry about moving around. Or going in and out in between the films, if you need to go and get air in between films, that's okay too. So we're going to just run through all 4 films pretty much straight through, and then would love to hear your experiences and questions and comments at the end. There will be real change, so we'll have maybe 90 seconds in between the films. We'll maybe bring the lights up just a point, and I'll do a real change, and then we'll get going again. So I think that's all I'll say. Oh, the one thing I always forget to say is the other thing that happens with silent films is nobody's sure whether or not they should laugh. And I think they're funny. Not everyone thinks these films are funny, but I actually do. So don't feel oppressed in that way by the silence either. I'm very happy to be here and happy to get to share this work with you. Good luck. It'll be about 95 minutes. Yes, because we're not really used to moving at this pace anymore. This is an 18th century pace, I think. And so our heads are often moving much faster, so many things are going to filter in. And I hope that, I mean, there are things in the text that I hope will even cue you to go other places and come back into yourself away from the screen. And I think that's one kind of aesthetic experience. I think there's the kind that we're probably most used to when we go to the cinema is we go to the movie theater and we are seeing a narrative film in which we are completely absorbed by that. The meaning is coming all the way off the screen, and nothing is really left in doubt. If the film is well made, there shouldn't be too many questions about what's going on. We don't want to not hear the dialogue or be confused too much about plot. And so, as viewers, we have a point of identification, and we can become completely absorbed in that work. That's one kind of experience. I'm, in my own, and I love that experience. I love going to the movies. In my own work, I'm more interested in creating an experience where the film is coming out and maybe hovering about here, and you are then asked to approach that. And then the meaning of the film exists not on screen or at the back of the room or just in your head, but somewhere hovering in the middle. And if there's something out here waiting for you, you as a viewer, your job is to approach or to step back, to approach again, to look at it from a slightly different angle. And so I am trying to create an experience that allows for a separation, a coming together, and another separation. So I'm glad it sounds like you're having the experience that I'm hoping that you're having. So that's good news for me. Yeah.
I also take that to mean that you expect people to want to see it again and to return to the work. And I mean, there's just so much there. I don't think I could ever.
Yes, I hope people want to return to the work. I spend usually 3 years on one of these films, and I know that I will see the films because I travel with them sometimes. And I do hope that, I do believe that the work yields different things on different numbers of contacts and different experiences. You will read different things, you will see different things when you see it again. Our culture is not set up in a particularly hospitable way for seeing this kind of work that often. But it has been gratifying to move through the world with the work and to meet people who are seeing it 2, 3, and 4 times. Partly because our community, the community of lovers of this kind of cinema, is a nomadic community to begin with. We are all moving around from this event on the West Coast to something in Europe, back in New York. You do get a chance to actually see this kind of work a lot if you are engaged in the community on that level. So I do make work with the idea that it will yield different things on different contexts. Anything else? Yeah.
What particularly drew you to use that main piece about borders? What particularly drew you to use that as the basis of the film?
I had started out, I went to a painting exhibition, and I saw some paintings by Agnes Martin. And I don't know if you know her work, but she makes 8-foot by 8-foot square grids. And if you and it's, they're often white with they're pencil lines that are grids. And if you stand 25 feet away and look at an Agnes Martin, you see a grid. And when we see a grid, it's very easy to think, got it. Minimalism comes from a certain set of ideas in art history. Got it. You could move on. But if you approach the painting, you see that the grid is highly irregular. She's drawn these lines with a 12-inch ruler and then has moved it and drawn another line. And we're not looking at minimalism at all, but some very austere and highly controlled mode of abstract expressionism. And when I had that experience, everything changed for me. And I started looking for a process, for a way to manifest that in my filmmaking. And what I ended up doing was I sat and tore pieces of black leader in half and spliced them back together with a splicer whose blade was out of alignment, so that there was a tiny little thin line. And then I did it again, and again, and again. And I put those little splice lines on a machine called an optical printer, which is like hooking a camera to a microscope that allows you to rephotograph frames and really blow them up. And so I was making the images that you see in the central section of that first film. Those are all splice lines. They are what is the division in cinema that defines duration and creates space in most of our cinema. I saw a footnote in a book referencing William Byrd's History of the Dividing Line and Secret History of the Line, and I thought, I will steal that title. I have a little formal, abstract film about splice lines, about dividing lines. I will steal Secret History of the Dividing Line, because in cinema we're never supposed to see a splice. It's supposed to be well-made and invisible. I'm just going to steal that title. But before I'll go look it up and at least see what the book is about. And I started reading, and that was 1996. And it's taken over my whole life. So be careful what you do when you go into a library. I got totally fascinated by the fact that I found this edition where it was the official history on one page and the secret history on the other, and the dividing line was the gutter of the book. And you could read, ostensibly this expedition was about property rights and taxation, which colony is going to get the taxes. In the secret history, you find out it's really about access to intercoastal waterways for shipping tobacco to subvert British trade tariffs. The secret history is very funny, and it's very raunchy. It tells what guys out on the expedition going across the country camping together, what actually happens. Right? The other thing is very stately and official. This other one's very funny. I grew up in North Carolina, and I recognized a lot of the landscape that they were moving through. So I had another layer of engagement. And I decided, okay, this is what I'm going to make a film about this. But it took me 7 years to make that film, because at first I didn't know what I was doing. And I was just organizing splices. It wasn't until I found the appendix, and until I spent one summer camping along the dividing line trying to find those 57 locations that are listed in the appendix. And that was the key to the organization of the film. I don't know how many people counted the number of splices. Right, no, nobody counts. Why would you? But there are 57 what I think of as landscapes that correspond to the 57 locations that you read in the appendix at the end. The partitioning of landscape to create the colonies, to create our states, that seemed like a really important place to start in terms of formation of our country. The 8th film revisits that line. I've photographed, I've shot film with a camera at all of those places. So it revisits the timeline, the appendix, and the dividing line photographically in the 8th of the 9 films that I made. Yes?
I'm curious about the text in the last piece and your arrangement of the text and how much, I'm taking that some of that is from the writing of Evelyn and some is from William Ryan.
Yes.
And it's quite clear to some degree what's what.
Yes.
But the kind of a poetic arrangement that you made, and I'm assuming that you're extracting text.
Yes, I'm taking fragments from many different places. A lot of that is translation of the Leonardo da Vinci Codex that we're seeing in the second section with the birds and the mirror writing that's backwards. So there's stuff from there. There's the sort of, it's all about birds. Bird watchers, the bird family. Leonardo da Vinci on the one hand, who was trying to understand flight through a combination of words and images. And then at the far end, the photographer Marais, whose pictures of birds actually revealed the principles that went into making the first airplane. Some of the writing is Marais. And so they, for me, are the bookends of a certain kind of empirical approach to understanding the world. And so it's what Deleuze would call a transcendental empiricism. And that's what I was going for in the film. So, yes, so it comes from many places. The other main source in that is Wittgenstein's Tractatus. Yes?
I really like the close-ups of the lines because it kind of looked like some bird's eye view of like geography or something in some ways. And I'm wondering if when you were making this film, since you're so precise, it seems like in the editing, and it's like the editing isn't, it's not like 3 different stages of production. It seems like they're kind of all intertwined.
Yes.
I'm wondering if, in addition to looking at things like form and obviously making connections between shapes and things that light make,
Yes.
And movement, like in terms of the speed and the way that things were edited together, especially towards the end.
Yes.
I'm wondering if those things were all planned out separately, or if they just sort of came together. If there's some type of if those things just are separate things, or what?
That's a good question. And I'm not sure there's a single answer. We're talking about the first film now, specifically.
Yeah, no,
No.
the one we just saw.
Oh, with the line, with the pacing of the words.
Yeah, the pacing of the words, and then I think there was like a lot of blinking, and there were lights and reflecting
Yes.
things and weird morphing looking
Uh-huh.
things.
Okay, so the first film, the number 57, is really important,
Yeah.
and everything's built off that. In the second film, the number 27 is very important. Kierkegaard's book, The Great Art of Knowing, was the first book of symbolic logic, and he proposed that if we can divide the world into 27 constituent parts, and we can put them into 3 columns, and you see that at one point, the different principles and subjects that he lists out. And he believed that through different combinations of those 27 things, we could know all there is to know about the world. 17th century was filled with people who were making total knowledge schemes, right? And I thought this was a particularly fascinating one. The poignant thing about William Byrd's library is not only does he have Kierkegaard's scheme for understanding the whole world, he's got Boyle's, and he's got 25 of these things because none of them work. So you have to keep finding another one. So anyway, the number 27 structures the entire film. There are 3 main parts to the film, and each of those 3 main parts is broken down into a series of 9 different things. Within each of those 9 things, there are series of 9 shots. So the movement you see at the end, you see 3 lines times 27. There are 81 different lines of text that come up. Now, you're not supposed to know this from seeing the film, right? This is how I work with the material. It's a constraint that I impose, that I feel the material gives me, and that I then impose on the work, and I use it as a guide for shaping the material. It becomes my compositional scheme. When I'm actually sitting down and choosing shots and editing, I am trying to create certain rhythms. I do want to bring you in and out of 3-dimensional space by going to the flat titles on black, to an image that is 3-dimensional, to text that comes up on that image and then flattens that image. So it moves from 3-dimensional to completely flat and then the space in between. That's very important and was a consideration in ordering those shots. Does that answer?
Yeah.
Okay, good. You had a question?
Yeah. Codex of Bruising,
Yes.
where the images melt.
Yes.
The focus.
Yes.
Did you do that incrementally, frame by frame?
I did.
Okay.
Well, and I did it by putting the tape transfer of the text from the codex on the optical printer, and as the camera and projector were photographing, I was racking the focus, and so it was moving in and out, and so those are all shots that are then dissolved into each other.
Right. And did you do that by looking at numbers and thinking about it, or did you just do it by?
I did that by looking at the qualities of the image,
Okay.
and I thought, okay, when this motion happens and when this letter appears, or
Right.
when now the bird appears, it's going to go out of focus.
Right.
Yeah. So I was. Sometimes I use the numbers, but I don't feel that they control what I'm doing.
Right.
And I cheat sometimes. I'm not going to tell you where, but I cheat a little bit. And it's like we were talking about Frampton's Zorn's Lemma earlier today, which is a super precise movie where every shot is 1 second. It progresses in a very particular way, and he put in a mistake because he said he was sure there would be one anyway, so he wanted to make one intentionally. And I do the same thing. These are not entirely analytical films. Emotion, feeling, response to the material. If I have to not do what the numbers tell me to, I'm very willing to do that. And that would happen particularly in looking through the eyepiece of the optical printer. I was just responding to the material. Other questions about this? Shall we proceed on, or has it been full? Because we could also stop here entirely. No? Okay, keep going. All right, we're going to keep going. All right. I'm going to tell you another part of the story of this. I got interested in the library. I got interested in the expedition And then I got interested in Byrd's daughter, Evelyn, and her love affair with Charles Mordaunt. She went and was able to meet, she went to England for her education, and in 1726 met Charles Mordaunt, who was the grandson of the 3rd Earl of Peterborough. They fell in love, started up this secret romance. Had to be secret because Peterborough was Byrd's main political rival at the time. Also, the Peterboroughs are a Catholic family, the Byrds are a good Protestant family. So eventually, of course, William Byrd discovers this, is furious, ships Evelyn back to Virginia, and separate, you know. Evelyn refuses back in Virginia to see all suitors. She, by age 29, still is not married. She's an old maid at 29, in those days, certainly. Turns out, she and Charles had carried on a secret 9-year transatlantic correspondence. This is before mail was regular back and forth. People were hand-carrying letters, sometimes just once a year back and forth on these ships. And eventually, in 1735, Charles was able to travel to Virginia under an assumed name and infiltrate Virginia society. And he rendezvoused with Evelyn at the chapel down the road from the Westover estate. And they made plans there to elope. They booked back a ship back to England with the help, they thought, of William Byrd's secretary, who it turns out was also in love with Evelyn, and he ends up betraying them. So Charles is detained aboard the ship. He's tied up on the ship. Evelyn's on shore, the ship sails. And after 9 years of their communication only through text, through language across the divide of the ocean, they're separated again. And Evelyn's crushed. She's heartbroken. And even more so when she finds out that in the course of the voyage, the ship has been caught in a storm and lost at sea, and everyone on board, including Charles, dies in the shipwreck. So Evelyn's best friend was Ann Harrison, who was the much younger wife of the owner of the neighboring plantation. And they would meet at the border of the two plantations every afternoon and walk through this grove of trees. And they had made a promise to each other when they were younger that whoever died first would try and come back and contact the other one. And shortly after Charles's death, while walking in this grove of trees, Evelyn announced that she thought she was so heartbroken that she couldn't possibly go on after this separation and Charles's death had happened. And 2 weeks later, she died of heart failure at the age of 29. The following spring in 1738 is the first of 17 recorded sightings of the ghost of Evelyn Byrd on or near the estate at Westover. I spent my graduate school years in a library when I was supposed to be making film. It took 2 years to put this story together, and I didn't know what the hell I was doing most of the time. I knew that I certainly wasn't making a film. I didn't know how to make a film out of this. And I thought, well, this is an amazing story. I must do something with it, but I'm never going to hire actors and get costumes and lights and a camera. I would be terrible at that. Because I'm happiest being in a library and putting Scotch tape on things. So it's going to be a good match to have a film crew. But I thought, okay, I'm going to start making this. I can at least make my abstract dividing line film, and I'll just know this other story. But something happened where I was moving from one apartment to another in Chicago, and I had all this stuff on the walls that had been there for a long time, including a little framed photocopy of a print that had been given to me by a professor in undergraduate school that she'd shown in class. This woman with her head turned and her hands dissolving. And she talked about the myth of the handless maiden when she showed this image in class. And I loved it. And so she made a photocopy of this lithograph and gave it to me. And I had it on my wall for about 7 or 8 years. And I'd now been doing the Byrd research for about 3 years. And in packing up all of this stuff, I was taking some things out of their frames. And I was taking this piece out of its frame, and the title of the piece is not actually The Handless Maiden. The title of this piece that had been on my wall for 7 years was Evelyn Byrd, the Ghost of Westover. I'd been living with her on my wall. And at that point, I felt like I have to make. This is not just an abstract formal film. This is not just going to be one movie. This is going to be a larger thing, and I have to find some way that, even though I don't tell stories in a conventional way, I have to try and get at some of the emotional truth of this story. And so now I'm making these 9 films that I hope to finish by 2028, which will be the 300th anniversary of the Dividing Line expedition. 4 down, 5 to go. As the cycle moves through, in the first 4 films, there's this movement back and forth between what I consider to be William Byrd, her father's perspective, and his way of approaching the world and his use of the library as a tool for analysis, and Evelyn's, what I imagine would be Evelyn's use of the library, what I think would be my use of a library, the way I actually encounter books and texts and ideas, and that is to feed an emotional life and to support my biology. That's what keeps me on the planet, are the emotions that are fed by text. So we're going to go into a film now that does not mention either of the Byrds by name, and is about, in many ways, the printing press and translation. But if the great art of knowing ends with Evelyn mourning Charles's death and an attempt to resurrect dead Byrds, I think this film follows. I think you'll see why it follows. In the 4th film, we really do move into Evelyn's space and Evelyn's time in the library. So that's what's coming up. You are a very generous bunch. You're still here to sit through these strange movies. So. And I do not take that for granted. So thank you. Here's the next one. I'm going to do a little real change. It's a pleasure to get to share that with you. I'd be happy to answer any questions, and I'm always interested to know what your experience is of making your way through this kind of work. So if there are any words. I also don't want anyone to feel oppressed by more words on top of all of those words. When Brackage used to do Q&As, he would say this lovely thing before he would start speaking. He didn't want anyone to feel trapped. He would just take a little pause and say, sometimes it was better to just to let the eyes have it and to take the films out into the night with you. And I thought that was always a generous thing for an artist who was present to say, no, just leave. You don't need to listen to me anymore. So, and I do feel that way. So if that invitation is extended to anyone who wants to go now. But I also am happy to talk about things. Yes.
What did you shoot the color footage in?
I shot. That's the old Ektachrome, maybe 7239.
Okay.
Yeah. And it's actually cut. I made 2 print. This film is 2 prints. It's a black and white print and a color print. I printed the color section separate, and it's actually spliced in because you can't on color stock get those qualities of black and white, and I didn't want to lose those in those other 2 sections. So there's tape splices in there.
David, I'm interested in, you may not have an answer, but you were so methodical in your thinking about the various compositions that you have in mind and which your works and the project as a whole. I'm interested in the last one, what potentially you were thinking about in terms of its duration, particularly the transition from the initial viewing of the text to that color segment.
For me, that's sort of the moment when emotionally the whole project changes. The titles that I selected out of the 4,000, there are 81 titles out of the 4,000 that pop up there, and I wanted to be representative of certain things that I thought were prevalent in Byrd's library. William Byrd chose those titles for a reason. And so many of them are about trying to understand the complete thing. Like the book about the theory of the earth from the beginning of time to the consummation of all things in 2 volumes. There were hundreds of those books in his library. It was astonishing, and really, to me, poignant, because I understand as a lover of books. Yeah, I always still think that's the book that's going to answer my question. If I just get that one, I'm going to be okay. Of course, it never does. And so I identify with that impulse. So I wanted to choose a lot of books. Like I wasn't going to do all 4,000 because that would have, I timed it out. If it had been a 7-hour film, I could have shown you all 4,000 titles. But I thought that I would start to lose people. It would be expensive. So I tried to make a selection that was, I knew it had to be at least 7 or 8 minutes. Like you had to be buried in that stuff. And you shouldn't be able to read all of it. You shouldn't be able to read all of it sometimes because it's too fast or because it's just plain illegible. From our distance in history, it's illegible. So I had to make it visually illegible. And so it has to be weighty, and it has to be a slog to get through all of that information, and to not know how to process it all. So it had to be long enough, also, so that when that color section and that section without text comes in, that there's that relief there, and that release that you're now asked to read in a different way. And so so figuring out, all right, how long do I make it where I can press myself, press the medium, and press viewers without having people totally check out before that moment of a deep breath in the color. And then the color sequence has to be short, because and then we have to go back, we have to leave it again and go back to words and other kind of imaging. Color will become more and more prevalent as the series goes on. In the 6th film, we get sound. At some level, I'm also trying to go alongside the history of the development of cinema. With the first film is entirely cameraless, then we get a camera. In this one, we get color comes in, sound will come in. There's a hand in this one. We'll get a foot in the next one. There'll be a face in the 6th one. Eventually, we'll get to people walking around and talking in synchronous sound in the 8th film when I visit the dividing line spots. And we'll be clearly, very, very clearly in the 21st century. And then so that's sync, sound, color, people, and then the final film is black and white and silent again, and shot all at night with moonlight. So that's a long answer, more to that question, but that's what I'm thinking about.
I think it's interesting, the introduction of that color sequence, because I don't know which film it happened in, earlier in one of the films, and I thought, I don't feel like I'm watching black and white films. There was a quality for black and white that just, said color to me. And then when I saw that, I thought that was bullshit. It was like that, the color, and just that emotional change, I guess, in those four films just sounded.
Thank you. I'm glad.
Yeah, I was wondering if you could speak a little bit more about your relation to the sort of this family's history, and how what the experience of working with this history so deeply and sort of discovering a bunch of it yourself for so long has how that's been.
I didn't plan to have any involvement with history at all. I mean, this is so unexpected from anything that I thought I was going to do as a filmmaker. So it's been a surprise, and it's been a comfort. To have a project that lasts this long is both really daunting and also reassuring. It is like family now to me. It's something that I will never get away from, that I will fight with, but I will love. The process, that initial discovery process, was exhilarating. Every day I felt like I was finding something. I wasn't doing original research. I wasn't digging holes in the backyard at Westover to find things. I was working in archives to find things that somebody had found, but hadn't come up to the surface in a while. It seemed like to me. So that the process of research, what I thought were clues, following the paper trail. I found that I'm not the only person obsessed by the Byrd Library. In 1958, this guy Edwin Moores wrote this book, article, where he spent 10 years of his life going all over the world trying to find Byrd's books, the actual physical objects. And he was able to locate 400 of the 4,000 and discovered that about 1,200 more had been destroyed in fires. And then still there's over 2,000 that we still haven't found. Somebody actually since then has found about another 200. I loved imagining his life, going from archive to archive, library to library. He found a lot of them in the library of the Pennsylvania Hospital in Philadelphia. All the medical books were there. Most Byrd books in the country are in Philadelphia. Jefferson sold some of Byrd's books before it becomes the Library of Congress, but there are Byrd books in the Library of Congress. I've enjoyed the hunt, and I've enjoyed the discovery and the tangents. At first I thought I was making one film, then I thought I was making 3 films, then it was going to be 7. Now I know, and I've known for a while, that it's 9, and that is enough to get through the issues that I think are really important and to also tell the story. It's been a great pleasure and also very scary. I guess that would be how I would sum it up.
How many, I'm sorry.
Yeah.
How many films are complete?
Those 4.
These
You've
4.
seen the completed
and
works.
This is a linear
No.
precision. No.
The first one that I started making the first film. And then I made the 3rd film, the Gutenberg film. And then I made the 4th film. And then I finished the 1st film. And the most recently completed is The Great Art of Knowing, which is the 2nd film.
But you showed them.
I showed them in the way that they fit in the series.
Yeah.
Yes. Yes.
And how important is it to you that they be shown in that?
And now that all these 4 exist, they have to be if they're all going to be shown together, they must be shown in that order. This is now like that's the order they go in. Obviously, when each film comes out into the world and goes to a festival, it goes out on its own. So each film is designed to stand and to exist. Yes, and that's how for most of each of these films' lives, they've gone out on their own. It's now a great pleasure to be able to put them together and find that it is in fact working. After 10 years, I was going to be very upset if it wasn't working, but it seems like it is. So it's now, I still show, individual films are still shown and rented for classes or for particular themed programs. These films do go out by themselves. But it is very satisfying to get to show them together. Probably 4 is as much as I'll show together at any one time. Number 5 is, I think, going to be very short and may actually be a nice coda to these 4. But then eventually when the cycle's done, it will be a two program or 2-night event. Because the films, some of the other films are quite long. Some of them are an hour long down the line. So I think the whole thing will be 5 hours when it's done.
Are some of those in progress as well?
Everything's in progress. Yeah, everything's in progress, but some things are just barely in progress. Like the last one, I'm just holding off. I have to decide when will black and white reversal films still exist. What's the last possible date at which I can shoot and process that film? Like ideally every 15 years, but we'll see. I may have to do it sooner. It's crazy to think in these terms. It seems to be what I've done. You had a question?
How would you relate your kind of process as a filmmaker to your process as a historian or as a researcher? You know, it seems as though those 2 processes are both very technical and also very kind of holistic and intellectual. And I'm just wondering how you kind of partition yourself between the 2.
I think I don't.
Yeah.
For me, I do move sort of seamlessly. I have the books in the studio, and then I'm filming the books right away. I take my camera into archives and libraries and film rare materials in the archives, and so it flows very easily. And I don't think of myself as a historian, because this actually isn't. This would be bad history. I'm interested in historical information, but I'm trying to use that not to the end of trying to tell a history, or only a history. But you're right, and I hadn't thought about that there is a technical side to it, there is an intuitive side to it. There is chance operates in both fields. Chance operates a great deal in research, and certainly in the way that I make film, chance at the beginning of a process is very, very important. And I get results from those experiments and those chance happenings and then shape those into a tighter composition where I'm making deliberate choices. I like that. I'm going to think more about that relationship and use that more. Thank you. Anything else? Yes?
Just the preface of the story before you showed the last two films made it so much more of a heart-wrenching sort of experience to watch them. In the first one where it pauses on the word ghost a lot, and then the words themselves kind of fade away off to the side. And then to have it go in and you said that it was kind of in her mind. I thought that really was in her mind, very much so, and I thought it was really amazing that you did that. Made the experience much more exciting.
Language is powerful stuff. And the decision for me as a filmmaker presenting work in person about when to tell certain things and how much to tell has been really interesting. And I've been presenting work in person for as long as I've been a filmmaker. And so I tried different things about, I'm going to tell this or I'm not going to tell this. It will condition your response in a certain way. For me, that's part of the experience and part of the experiment of being a filmmaker. Because these works exist to a degree on their own, and when I make them in the studio, I'm not thinking a lot about viewers. I'm thinking about the medium a lot and what I feel my responsibility is to the medium. I'm aware and I'm hopeful always that there are viewers for this. These are made to go out into the world. And so I do think about and enjoy the fact that the experience we're having right now is not all about what's up on screen. It's also about the fact that we're all in this one room at one time, and these films then become props for a communication and interaction and exchange of ideas. And so sometimes people with any sort of art are upset when they think, oh, well, that doesn't stand on its own. Because without that explanation, without this piece of text, without this or that, I wouldn't understand it. And I just sort of don't buy that. I believe that I don't believe there's ever something with no context. I believe there are different kinds of contexts, and different contexts exist at different levels of familiarity to us as viewers of work. I also think I don't believe in the total and totalizing artwork. I'm very happy for my art to be not just what I do with film, but the way the work comes into the world and I get to share it with you. And so I'm glad that telling the story at that moment enriched your experience of those second two films. That was my hope in deciding, you know what, I haven't done this in a long time. I want to come back into the room and add, it's not a film, but it's an element of the evening that I wanted you to have. So I'm glad it was good. I'm glad it was good. Thank you very much.
Thank you, David.
Thank you.